Daniel tells us of a 7-year peace treaty that the Antichrist will put in place that he will eventually break halfway through it. Something very similar along those lines is taking place next month in September, and it's hosted by the United Nations.
No, it doesn't. Daniel 9 verses 24 through 27 tell us about the first coming of the Messiah and his coming against Jerusalem. All of that you just said, you're putting all of that onto what Daniel actually said. That is not what Daniel actually said.
But Daniel 9:27 says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In the middle of that 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out.
So you're using the New International Version, which is the only translation in the English that uses the phrase set up an abomination. That's not accurate. The phrasing should actually be on the wing of abominations will come the one who makes desolate. The abomination is not something that is set up in the temple. It's someone who brings destruction to the temple and the city for that matter. He makes it desolate. Next up, the he right here is the antecedent of this he would be the Messiah, the prince, or the prince who will come. That he's mentioned in verse 25, and verse 26. The Messiah, the prince, will make a firm covenant. The Hebrew denotes that he's strengthening an already existing covenant. We know that Jesus came to establish the new covenant. This is the covenant that he is firming up with the many for that week. No, it doesn't just last a week. It was established that week. Next, it says in the middle of the week, he will make sacrifice and grain offering cease. It doesn't say that he breaks the covenant or he breaks the treaty. It just means treaty is not even in the text. So I don't know why y'all keep on inserting that into the text. But it simply says that he will make sacrifice and grain offering cease, which is exactly what the new covenant did. The old covenant involved sacrifice and grain offerings. There's no more of that anymore. Let's see how the author of Hebrews exegetes Psalm 40, verses 6 through 8 for us. Hebrews 10, verse 5, therefore, when he comes into the world, he says, sacrifice and offering you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me, and burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you have taken no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I have come, and the scroll of the book, it is written of me, to do your will, O God. This is Jesus. When Jesus comes into the world, sacrifices and offering, Yahweh, his Father, did not desire. A body he prepared for him. Even though sacrifices and burnt offerings was a part of the old covenant system, God that was required of the people. God didn't have any pleasure in that. He didn't have any true pleasure in that. And burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you have taken no pleasure. Behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book, it is written of me to do your will, O God. Who did the will of God? Jesus did. Verse 8, after saying above, sacrifices and offerings and burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you have not desired, nor have you taken pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Then he said, behold, I have come to do your will. He takes away the first in order to establish the second. Please tell me you guys are still watching. Please tell me that you're still following this. By this will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. So Jesus, the Messiah, the Prince, he came to be the once and for all sacrifice. Therefore, his death would put an end to sacrifices and offerings. This is why Jesus establishes it in the beginning of the week, in the middle of the week. He brings an end to sacrifices and offerings because his death in the middle of the week, when he is cut off and has nothing, that puts an end to sacrifices and offerings.
On a side note, I wanted to reference some people believe that the prophecy of Daniel 9:27 already took place, and some even believe that it was Jesus who fulfilled that, but it really doesn't make sense to me. I'll why.
It's because you don't do exegesis, sir. It's because you don't actually study the Bible. You just repeat the same talking points that are popularly spread. Verse 24 is talking about anointing the most holy one. Remember that to the Pharisees, Jesus referred to himself as the temple. Verse 25 says that the Messiah, the Prince, who is Jesus, would arrive after the 7 and 62 weeks. Verse 26, the Messiah will be cut off after the 62 weeks. The Prince here is still the Messiah. In the sentence before, the angel is referring to him as the Messiah, the Prince. Now, I know it may be hard for y'all to accept that the people of the Prince, being Jesus, would come and destroy the city and the sanctuary, even though that's exactly what happened. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, he's the disciples, they're complimenting the beauty of the temple. Jesus says, look here, y'all, not one of these stones will be left standing upon another, which prompts them to ask him, when will these things be? And what will be the signs of these things coming to pass? And Jesus tells them. So what I'm saying is in perfect harmony with Matthew 24. There is no confusion. There is no, that doesn't make any sense. No, that makes perfect sense. Jesus wanted the temple destroyed, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war, desolations are decreed.
There's a case to be made that this is a twofold prophecy that some of the early church actually went through as well. But Jesus himself even said, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet, let the reader understand, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And he goes on to say how people need to flee, don't go for your cloak. It'll be a hard time and it'll be dreadful for people, and pray that you're not a pregnant woman in those days. But we can look down.
What about what Jesus also said in Luke 21? How do you explain verse 20? But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation is at hand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those who are in the midst of the city must leave. Those who are in the countryside must not enter the city, because these are the days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath against this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So when you say there are some who believe this already happened, it literally did. It really did. It happened in history. Josephus records it. Eusebius records it. Suetonius records it. Tacitus records it. The siege on Jerusalem and the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus Vespasian is a historical fact. And Eusebius believed it to be a fulfillment of what Luke spoke, or at least recorded in his Gospels. And that's why Christians left and went to Pella, because they remembered the words of Jesus when they saw Jerusalem was surrounded by armies.
But we can look down to Matthew 24:29, and it says, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet, so it doesn't make sense to me how Daniel 9:27 could have taken place. Jesus references it, and then the next thing he references is that. Just doesn't line up with the prophecy of Daniel and the prophecy Jesus told us of the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24.
It's because you don't understand what you're reading, bro. All that stuff about the sun going dark, moon turning to blood, and the stars falling from the sky, this is just judgment language used in the Bible. It is hyperbole. It is not literal. It is figurative. And what is being described has happened. And Jesus, or God, has come in judgment, riding on the clouds against nations. He's come against Egypt in Exodus. He's come against the Babylonians. You just don't know that because you don't study. You just repeat what is popular, which is the habit of people on TikTok. I really see that now.